Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Looking for some cheap vacation spots this summer? Stay tuned to find out a few places where you can go for free. Hello everyone, it's a new month and you are listening to Advanced Studio Classroom. I'm today's host, Brandon. We start off with a travel article this month, and we have two people in the studio who are perfect for this article because I think... Tell me if I'm wrong. I think you both like to travel, right? Welcome, Pauline.
I thought you were going to say we were both cheap, which was also maybe true,
I will
too.
not comment on that. I have no idea about that. But,
hey, everyone. This is Pauline. I'm happy to be here with my husband. And one of the things we most love to do together is travel.
Yeah, Josh is here with us as well. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Brandon. Yes, it's true. Pauline and I love to travel. Not just internationally, but also within the country that we're in. So, but being able to do so means being able to stretch your dollar, meaning get the most that you can out of the money that you spend on travel. So in that way, we do like cheap travel as well.
Yeah, you can also say we like to travel on the cheap.
Yes.
That's another way of saying it.
Okay, so you all like to travel. Do you like a variety of places, or do you kind of just like to do one particular type of traveling?
Well, we are especially drawn to beaches, mostly because we love scuba diving so much. That's kind of currently what drives a lot of our travel. But we also love mountains. We love museums. Pretty much any opportunity we have to explore and discover the world around us, whether that's cultural sites or nature, we're up for it.
All right. Well, today we are talking, and tomorrow we're talking about places that you can go for free. Now, you know, when I travel, I don't usually think of going to places for free. Josh, I usually think I'm going to have to pay for something.
Well, that's a very good point. And that's usually what most people assume when they go traveling, is that it's going to be very expensive because you have to pay for everything. You have to pay for a place to stay. You have to pay to go out to eat. You have to pay for any sort of activities that you do. But actually, there is, in the world, in many places, there are many opportunities to go do things that are fun that you don't have to pay an entrance for or a ticket for.
Well, the truth is someone's paying for it, right? There's tax dollars or something. It's not free, but you personally may not have to pay for it, right? At least not when you go to each individual site. And so this is kind of a cool idea, this article, putting together some places around the world where you can go for free. And we start off in the UK today, and we'll also visit the US and other places around the world. So we are on page 10. If you have your article or your magazine with you, you can open up to that page or follow along on your digital device as we have our first reading for today.
Cheapo travel. Awesome places in the world that you can see for free. You can pay a fortune to travel around the world, or you can pay nothing at all. Here are some places you'll never regret visiting that won't cost you a dime. The British Museum, London, UK. You need to go here to see the Egyptian mummies, the ancient Greek marbles, and so many other treasures. It's open every day, and unlike most other attractions in England that cost an arm and a leg, it's completely free. National Mall, Washington, D.C., USA. You can walk a pathway from the Lincoln Memorial to the Stark Vietnam Veterans Memorial to the Washington Monument, with other sites in between. Did you know you can go up in the elevator to the top of the Washington Monument? Tickets are free, but pay a small fee to reserve them in advance to avoid being disappointed.
So the title of our article is Cheapo Travel. Now, Josh, a lot of times, of course, we see the word cheap, but now this word has an O on the end of it, and we say cheapo. Why do we have this word?
Well, it's sort of an informal or a slang term of saying that something is on the cheap or something you can do cheaply.
All right, and so that's exactly what we are doing. We're traveling on the cheap, and we're talking about awesome places in the world that you can see for free. And we start off talking about paying a fortune for something. Sometimes, Pauline, this is just basically a figure of speech, right? A fortune is a lot of money. We're just saying that you can pay a lot for something.
Right, exactly. And travel does tend to cost a lot of money, especially if it's international travel, if you have to fly to get there and then you have to pay to stay in a hotel and you have to pay for all your food. That starts to add up. And reality is, I think most of these places that we're going to look at today aren't places that are in your backyard. You are going to have to pay to get there. So I wouldn't say you don't have to pay anything at all because you have to pay just to travel to arrive there. But they are saying that once you arrive at your destination, depending on where you choose to go, you might find that there are some free attractions that you can, save your money by going to these places you can get into for free.
Right, that's exactly right. These are free attractions. Doesn't mean that everything in the trip is free, of course. You do have to pay for airfare and lots of other things, but the places that we're talking about, you do not have to pay an entrance fee in order to go to them.
And I like the way they say it. They say it won't cost you a dime. And a dime, of course, is 10 cents in American dollars. It's just, it means it won't cost a thing.
Yeah, so that's another figure of speech we use. It won't cost you a dime. And wouldn't make much sense to use that in other countries, but this is from the U.S., and so that's why they're using that figure of speech. Where do we start off? Josh?
So here we are starting off in London, England, at the British Museum.
All right. Have either of you been to London or the UK?
I have been to London, but only for a couple of days, so I didn't get to go to the British Museum. And actually, I did not know that the British Museum was free. This was a surprise to me.
Well, I didn't either. I just went to London last year, actually. I did not go to the British Museum. I didn't know it was free. I'm actually not a huge museum person, but if it's free, maybe I would check it out. There's a lot here that you can see, so maybe I would enjoy it. But I totally recommend going to London. It's a fantastic place to visit, but it can be expensive, so it's interesting, Josh, to find something free in London.
Yeah, so I did go to London. I had a friend who was studying as an exchange student in King's College, but instead of really exploring the city, we decided to do something else that was sort of not exactly free but low cost. We went trekking, meaning that we went hiking along a number of trails and we stayed at a different little bed and breakfast every single night. So the day was filled with hiking from one place to the next, and of course there were no entrance fees to the hiking trails, which were really nice. But had I known that the British Museum was free, I may have gone in order to visit there because I do enjoy seeing museums.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say, museums aren't my number one favorite thing to do. I enjoy museums, but often the price of entrance for a museum does stop me from going.
Yeah.
So knowing this, I would be a lot more interested.
All right.
And part of the reason I think most of us wouldn't consider going to a museum is because most museums we're familiar with are kind of expensive in order to get in. Although I do have to point out that there are many museums, especially national museums, where they will have maybe low-cost day or a free day.
Yeah.
Right? So those will be very popular days because you can get in for free. But this is a little bit surprising for me to hear that the British Museum is open every day and free every day.
There we go. And now you can see some pretty amazing things there. They talk about Egyptian mummies. Now, this I would actually be interested in because I do like history. And so to be able to go and see some of the mummies, apparently on their website you can see their coffins and their mummies and other items there. And even they talk about there's modern research methods such as X-rays and CT scans that are used to examine the mummification process. And so that sounds fascinating to me.
That sounds super interesting.
What else can you see there, Pauline?
Well, okay, so the next thing it says is the ancient Greek marbles. And I have to be honest, when I first read this, the way I read it was like the game marbles, like those little...
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, ancient Greek marbles? Really? They played marbles? But I don't think that's what they mean. Marble is also like a very expensive stone, right? That I'm assuming that's what it is.
That's probably what it is. Yeah, that's a good point. Probably not playing marbles there, but that would be fun. And there are lots of other treasures you can see there. You can go to the website britishmuseum.org to see all of the things that they offer. It is open every day. And it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. That's another good phrase to know, Josh.
Yeah, so something that's very expensive, like if you had to give up an arm and a leg in order to do something, you would think, well, that's a pretty high price to pay.
That's right.
But we use it in order to say something that really cost a lot.
Yes.
And this is a really common idiom. When we're talking about idioms, sometimes they're fun to learn, but they don't come up frequently in speech. But I feel like something costs an arm and a leg. That one comes up fairly frequently.
It does, yeah. It's a good one to know. So visit britishmuseum.org to find out more. Next, we go to the National Mall in Washington, D.C. in the United States. This is a place that I am more familiar with. I lived about 3.5 hours away from Washington, D.C. in Central Virginia for several years, so I visited this place many times. So we have many different monuments and so forth that you can go to. Now, I think Josh and Pauline, you've both visited Washington, D.C. as well.
Yes.
Okay.
I have been there twice, and I had very different experiences the two different times because the first time I went, it was extremely cold and windy, and we tried walking the National Mall, and it was so cold that most of my memory is affected by just how cold it was and how we were trying to run from one sheltering point to another.
But that's interesting because you're from a cold state.
I am from a cold state.
Probably a colder state, I would say. Montana.
Yeah,
is
but
cold.
we don't have the humid cold like you get on the East Coast. Like that wind and that humidity is kind of a different thing. And I don't think it was in the spring. I don't think we were expecting it to be as cold. So I don't think I was prepared with clothes either for it. Anyways, and then the other time I went, it was blistering hot. So
yes,
the weather can be very extreme.
So Pauline was focused on the weather, not so much the monuments and so forth. Josh, you also visited Washington, D.C., right?
Yeah, I was lucky that, so as a high school student, we did a field trip that was organized by my high school to Washington, D.C., and we did a lot of sort of the historical tour of the area. And that was a very interesting tour. And then also later on as a college student, I ended up in the D.C. area in a summer for a little bit, so I was able to come and visit National Mall. It's a really lovely area. But, of course, if the weather is no good, I can imagine that it would be
not so lovely.
Not so lovely, right? But so I also visited here, and so there's a number of things that you can visit in this area and see it as a part of American culture and American government. So it's worthwhile to go see all the different monuments.
A good time to go is in the spring, not on a cold spring day, but they do have the cherry blossoms there, which a lot of people will go there to see that, and it just adds to the effect.
Actually, my favorite things I did when I was there was going to some of the museums. And I don't think they were free, but my memory was that they were quite cheap. So I still feel like that would fit under cheapo travel, even if it isn't free travel.
Yes.
They have some fantastic museums.
Yeah, I remember, of course, they have the Smithsonian, and there's a lot there. But there's also a Holocaust museum, which is, as you can imagine, really tough to go through, but very, very meaningful if you have a chance to do that. Well, the article mentions some other famous spots in Washington, D.C. Of course, the Lincoln Memorial, which is maybe the most popular one, and also the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And they describe this, Josh, as being stark.
That's a good description. Stark is kind of a powerful word to see both. It's like simple and obvious and stands out at the same time, which is a good description for this memorial. It's a long, long piece of black marble in a V shape that has the names of all the soldiers who died in the Vietnam War. And at least when I visited there, I actually went with the purpose of trying to find someone, that a family friend who they weren't sure had come back from the Vietnam War, so went to go get a rubbing of the name.
It's a really somber feel there, and So it's very meaningful for a lot of people, especially if you had family members who fought in that war.
By the way, what is the picture? We see a picture above I know of the National Mall, but that building, which building is that?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. That is the Washington Monument, which has been under construction. It is, supposed to be open now, and so hopefully you can visit that. But it has been under construction for some time. Actually, I've never been inside that, but apparently there's an elevator that you can take up to the top of this monument, and so that would be pretty cool to do, and I guess you can maybe look out. I think there are 2 tiny windows, it looks like, maybe at the top there that maybe you can look out. Have either of you done that?
I have not. I've been to the bottom of the Washington Monument, but we did not want to take the time in order to take the elevator.
I think the best thing is just walking it around and looking at everything. Like you have the reflection pool there, and you have all these cool buildings and the architecture. To me, that's the best thing about Washington, D.C. Well, next we're going to go back to Europe, actually. We're going to visit France. So we're going to our second reading, and after that, we'll talk about Cuba.
Notre Dame Cathedral, Paris, France. This great treasure of the world simply can't be missed. The great rose stained glass window alone is worth the visit. The Sunday Mass, with Gregorian chanting, was like stepping back in time. Admission is free every day, but you're welcome to leave a donation. There are also free tours a few times each week. You'll pay extra for tours of the bell tower or the crypt.
So now we are visiting France. We are actually visiting Notre Dame, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And as you know, back in April, there was a massive fire that greatly damaged this cathedral. And so at the original time of the publication of this article, of course, this had not happened yet. But now you have to take that into consideration before visiting. So be sure to check out the website for more information on future visits and the construction that they will be doing to rebuild this beautiful cathedral. Well, this great treasure of the world simply can't be missed. That's a strong statement, so it sounds like we should visit. And they have this great rose-stained glass window. Now, most of you probably have seen stained glass. It's beautiful. There are usually, of course, or I guess always, different colors, and it's a special, I guess, kind of glass, Josh.
Yeah, so it's designed so that when the sun or the light is streaming through it, then you get a really beautiful picture of whatever it is trying to depict. So sometimes it might be patterns, but many times it also is figures and shapes.
All right, and what else can you participate in as you visit Notre Dame, Pauline?
Well, it is a functioning cathedral, right? So you can actually go and experience a Sunday Mass there. And when you do, you'll be able to experience the Gregorian chanting that is happening inside as well.
So this Notre Dame Cathedral is a Catholic church, and so they do have something called Mass, if you're not familiar with that, and that is, people take bread and drink wine to remember the Last Supper of Jesus and to remember what he's done, dying on the cross for our sins. And so that is something called Mass, and you can attend that there. And also, they have something called Gregorian chanting, Josh.
So Gregorian chanting is a type of religious singing that just involves voices, no music, and it's usually sort of a one tone or one syllable that is repeated over and over again, many times in Latin.
And this has been in use since the Middle Ages, and so that's a pretty cool fact to know that they're still doing something today that was going on during the Middle Ages, and you can go and see that. And so that's why they said it was like stepping back in time, right? Because it's been going on for a long time. So how much does it cost?
Again, it is free, although you're welcome to leave a donation. And I'm sure that's true in a lot of these places too, that if you are feeling really grateful for the experience and you are someone who has some money to share, that you can leave a donation and maybe that helps them keep it free for others who couldn't pay to get in.
There are also free tours that you can take part in each week. And if you want to go to the bell tower or the crypt, you will have to pay for that.
So I lived in Germany for a few years, and so I was able to travel around Europe quite often. And if you get a chance to travel in Europe, I would suggest going to most major cities will have large churches or cathedrals of different types. They all are usually very interesting just to look at the building, but there are also large organs inside of the churches. And many times the people who are practicing the organ for their Sunday services will practice throughout the week. So sometimes it's even possible to go to one of these cathedrals and hear sort of a free practice concert.
Wow. Well, when I was in England, I was able to go, I guess as part of the Church of England. It's where the royal family, they get married. It looks so huge on TV, but it's actually very small. So I was able to go to one of those services on a Sunday.
Okay.
It's very formal, and you can, if you're seated in a certain place, you might sit in the same place where some royalty have been during a wedding or something like that. So that was cool. So you can find these, as Josh said, these special kind of services in these older churches, especially in different parts of Europe, but even all over the world.
Is the rose-stained glass window that they're talking about, is that what you can see, that big circle, almost flower-patterned window in the picture below? Do you know if is that the one they're referring to?
It might be. I'm not sure.
That's what I'm guessing. Is I think that is kind of the iconic.
Right. It's that central piece there on the church, so that would make sense. Well, they talk about something here. We know the bell tower, but this word crypt, what is that, Josh?
Well, the crypt is usually it's an underground area where human remains are kept. Many times it will be for, especially for cathedrals, it will be for important members of the church community or even some saints in the Catholic tradition.
In this particular crypt, they have artifacts that you can see. And, that would be cool to go and see pieces, things from the past that they kind of have preserved. And you can see that. I guess that's sort of a museum in and of itself. And so that would be fascinating to go and take part in. So we are in France. Where are we going to next, Pauline?
Well, now we get to go to Latin America. We get to go to Havana, Cuba.
All right, let's go. Right now we'll have our last reading, and we'll come back to discuss.
Fusterlandia, Humanitas, Havana, Cuba. Artist Jose Fuster left Cuba decades ago to travel in Europe and came back inspired to decorate his rundown property in the struggling Havana suburb of Humanitas with broken tiles in homage to Spanish architect Gaudí. Eventually, he covered a good portion of the neighborhood with his whimsical tile art, including bus stops, benches, front gates, doctors' offices, and more. His own property is covered with sculptures of fantastic creatures. For anyone who enjoys folk art, this is a must-see. And it's incredible that there's no entrance charge. Expect to see tons of tourists every day, and maybe even the artist himself, who still lives and works there.
All right, we are now in Cuba, Havana, Cuba, and we are meeting an artist here. What's his name, Josh?
Jose Fuster.
All right, you said that so well. Josh and Pauline both speak Spanish, right? So they can help us out with any of those special pronunciations. So he left Cuba decades ago to travel in Europe, and then he was inspired while he was in Europe. And he came back to his home in Cuba in Havana to decorate his rundown property. Now, if a property, we describe it as rundown, it's old, it needs to be fixed up. And this is a struggling area. It's in a suburb of Havana. And how do you say the name of the suburb, Josh?
Hamanitas.
All right. And he brought back, or he used broken tiles. And why did he do that?
Well, he did that to honor this Spanish architect that he had encountered while he was in Europe. And we use the word homage here. Actually, this is an interesting word, partly because we actually had to have a whole conversation as a panel before this started, in that we all tend to pronounce this word a little differently. There's actually a lot of different pronunciations. Josh, how do you usually pronounce this word?
Well, I usually say homage, right? Because it comes from the old French word homme or homme, which means after the person. But there are many different ways people pronounce this
Right,
word.
and I usually say homage, like they said it in here, homage. Anyways, either way, the meaning is the same, even though you'll hear a few different pronunciations of it, which, like Josh said, is just an honor and memory, or in some way responding to another person.
All right. So that's why he chose to use the tiles. And eventually he covered a good portion of the neighborhood with his whimsical tile art. Whimsical, that's just like fun or playful, right?
Yeah, creative, yeah, imaginative. Yeah, it's a fun word.
All right. And so that included bus stops, benches, front gates, doctors' offices, and more. And so it sounds like the whole town is kind of decorated in this fashion. And that's what I think is attracting a lot of people who doesn't, you can see a wall or something, but you see a whole area. That sounds like fun.
It reminds me of that painted village near Taichung. I've wanted to go there for quite a while now, where it's like the whole village has been painted. I know it's not just a few walls, but it's also the ground, and I think also maybe benches. It's that same kind of idea, and people flock there because it's such a unique place, so colorful. It's great for lots of Instagram pictures.
Yes, it is.
I imagine it's the same with this place, a very similar, right? Another whimsical area, but instead of paintings, it's tiled mosaics.
Right.
It really sounds amazing.
It is, and his own property is even covered with sculptures of fantastic creatures. And they talk about folk art, which has the idea of, art that's based on traditions in a community or culture. So they call it a must-see, and there's no entrance charge, and you would expect to see tons of tourists there, no matter which day you go. You may even run into the artist himself, because he still lives and works in this area. The website is there at the bottom of this section if you would like more information. Well, tomorrow we're going to visit a few more places that are free, so be sure to join us for day 2 of this month's travel article, Cheapo Travel. Until tomorrow, this is Brandon.
I'm Pauline.
And this is Josh.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.